All right, I think we'll move on to the next session. Katie Kaliszewski currently works at the state level for the Wisconsin Department of Transportation Cultural Resources team. Tonight, she will lead a discussion with multiple historic preservation professionals from the state of Wisconsin regarding how the field and the 106 process has adapted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As many of us know, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act is the backbone of historic preservation in many states. Its successful completion often relies on dedicated cultural resource specialists in both public and private roles. The session was pre-recorded, and I believe Katie has joined us to join the question and answer session following. So Maya, whenever you're ready, we'll go ahead and share that.
No, wait till it says this.
I'm sorry.
Of the class of 2011, although I, like many, finished my thesis a bit later, class of January 2013. This year's symposium's theme is local, global, real, virtual. And I am sure that many of us who have had to work through the COVID-19 pandemic has a lot of feelings about all of those words. For me, they make me think of all the changes and issues I and my colleagues have had to work through, trying to keep Section 106 reviews moving forward in a time where everything was shut down. Here in the Midwest, like much of the country, Section 106 surveys account for a majority of historic resources that are identified and evaluated. Departments of transportation across the country tend to be the agencies that do most coordination with SIPO due to the nature of the work we do. And I have seen how the Midwest has approached the pandemic and how we have lived those words, local, global, real, and virtual. I myself started as a consultant at the firm of Mead & Hunt back in 2013, which is based in Madison, Wisconsin. A majority of the work we did there, we completed, were Section 106 surveys. While I was there, I was able to closely work with the WisDOT Cultural Resources team and SHPO staff. In 2019, I moved on to the Wisconsin SHPO, where I worked as a compliance reviewer and the keeper of all of the compliance files. And then last year, just as the COVID-19 pandemic hit, I was hired to be part of the WisDOT Cultural Resources team. It's been an interesting transition throughout the pandemic, but I believe, as we will discuss here, that Wisconsin was kind of uniquely suited for this transition to a digital 106 world. We transitioned to digital 106 early on in the pandemic, late March, and we really have not had one slowdown, unlike many other states. So today I've pulled together people who I worked with for years to discuss how Wisconsin manages its Section 106 program and how that led to a pretty successful transition to digital compliance. I've invited several people who I work with closely to have a bit of a roundtable discussion on their roles, preservation in Wisconsin and the Midwest, and where we're going in the future. So thanks everybody for stopping by. And the first thing I'm gonna have is ask everyone to introduce themselves, tell me where you work, for how long, and what your background is. Bethany?
Hi, I'm Bethany Bacher-Gressick. I work for the Federal Highway Administration. I've been in transportation for about 20 years now. Half of it here in Wisconsin, and the other half I was in Washington, D.C., working for an environmental nonprofit and Federal Highway. I have an environmental and biology background and seem to have always had an appreciation for everything historic. Part of the reason I chose the campus I went to college at was because it had buildings on the National Register. I had a class one year and planning, and they actually talked about this thing called ICE-T and T21, and they are different surface transportation laws, and they mentioned things like providing funding for community enhancements, like historic preservation of transportation buildings and bicycle and pedestrian facilities, wildlife facilities, and from that moment I was hooked and found my way in transportation, working on things like the transportation enhancements and scenic byways, and now I work on everything from small projects that could be anything from painting stripes on roadways all the way up to full reconstruction capacity expansion projects through National Historic Landmarks and other things.
Excellent. Thank you, Bethany. I don't know how I go after that. My name is Lynn Cloud. I am the lucky person who gets to work with Katie now. I have been in the role in cultural resources for 25 years. I would like to note I'm not an archaeologist, nor am I an architectural historian. My schooling comes from the DOT School of Hard Knocks, as I like to say. It was a happy accident, I guess, that I landed in this role. And if you know anything about state service, that does happen, especially at the Department of Transportation. They see that you have a skill set that might not be a technical skill set, but they see that you're a good fit, so they do some shifting. I like to say I'm the organizer of a lot of chaos that does happen. So thank you, Katie, for inviting us here today to participate in this. I think it'll be very good information for everybody to hear.
Yes, I think so too.
I'm Kimberly Cook. I am at the Wisconsin Historical Society State Historic Preservation Office. I'm a compliance reviewer. There are 4 reviewers and we split the agencies, and WisDOT is mine. Federal highways, mine. I won't give them up. So I do everything that's transportation. And I've been in this capacity for 10 or 11 years. Before that, I was with the Wisconsin Historical Society as a field archaeologist. And that particular contract archaeology arm predominantly did WisDOT projects. So I had been doing archaeology on the transportation side of things for about, again, 10 or 11 years prior to that. So I've been at the Society for 20 years and plan to be here for another 20 more, hopefully. Thanks.
Thanks. I can't believe it's been 20 years already.
I know. Katie, Lynn, and Bethany, and everybody, Emily, they make everything so easy.
We try. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Pettis. I am a senior historian and department manager at Mead & Hunt in the Madison office. Katie originally worked with me back when she started with Mead & Hunt. I have been doing Section 106 compliance for just about 20 years. In 1 month and 1 day, I will have been in my position for 20 years. From day one, I have been doing Wisconsin DOT compliance projects. I also do compliance work all over the country. So we do projects as small as a single bridge replacement, beam guard, and we do statewide thematic surveys also. So I have done statewide historic highway and bridge surveys. And just a lot of what we do is Section 106. And then we do support WisDOT with their compliance review as well.
Thank you, Emily. And then I'm going to pass it over to Kristen. Kristen's sadly a little bit of the odd person out, but I appreciate her coming to talk about Minnesota's work, which is an interesting counter to how kind of Wisconsin dealt with the pandemic. So Kristen, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Sure. Kristen Schumler. I am a cultural resource specialist now with Mead & Hunt. I have been here for 3 months. So similar to you, Katie, I made a job transition during the pandemic, which has been a bit odd, but I know so many of the people at Mead & Hunt. I've been working with them for many years. So it kind of felt like a natural transition. But prior to that, I worked at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I was the Cultural Resource Unit Manager, worked at MnDOT for almost 18 years to the date. Prior to that, I did consulting, so I've been doing Section 106 consulting work for 30 years. I'm both a archaeologist and a historian, so I've sort of seen both sides of those disciplines. You know, done everything from, you know, statewide bridge studies to programmatic agreements to just, you know, small individual projects. But the thing that's really great now working with Mead and Hunt is really being able to see sort of a more nationwide perspective of how things are done. And it's fascinating because it really does vary quite a bit state to state. So I'm happy to be the odd person out here sort of sharing some other Midwest examples.
Yes, and I really appreciate you taking the time, everyone taking the time to talk with me today. So my second question for all of you is, can you describe your job before COVID? What was kind of the standard procedures for Section 106 in your state before everything shut down?
Do you want me to start, Katie, or?
Yeah, why don't you start, Lynn?
Okay, great. So I guess it's important for this conversation to understand that there are two cultural resource staff at Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Again, you've learned I'm not a technical expert, and my coworker at the time, just before the pandemic began, was an archaeologist. So it was he and I managing the program. He notified us, his last day of work was Martin Luther King, the Friday before that. So he notified us that he had gotten a different job and was leaving. So I was there alone as the pandemic began. I think that's important because we were doing everything via paper. Everything came U.S. mail. Everything was passed on to SHPO via U.S. mail. And here I was already quite traumatized because, again, I'm going to say it again, I was alone at DOT trying to manage the cultural resource program at a time where everything was changing and we suddenly needed to figure out how are we going to do this from our homes. So thankfully, SHPO, Kim Cook is amazing. Katie was at SHPO. She hadn't been offered her job yet at DOT. We actually interviewed her the day before. We could not see people in person anymore, just so you understand how quickly this all happened. So then we just all talked. I mean, I think that was the biggest thing. We immediately started communicating. We started writing emails back and forth, and we had quick conversations. How can we turn this into electronic processing? And again, Katie mentioned it. We were already starting to talk about transition to electronic submittals, and SHPO was starting to work on a program. So I think it was just the natural force that pushed us into going to electronic submittals. One piece of the process I want to speak to that I think was probably even more difficult than converting everybody to sending everything on email and then learning to use Box and DocuSign and all the things that came with that was tribal notification. So as part of the 106 process, we do tribal notification, and we had not yet been doing electronic notification, email notification. Everything was still going on paper because that was the preference of the tribal historic preservation officers. So we had to quickly figure out and start those conversations of how do we switch this over? And that was my job at DOT to do that. So it was a big undertaking. I was so grateful the day that Katie came in. And to, again, give an understanding of what that looked like during COVID, we met her, myself and our supervisor in the office. We were probably there, Katie, what, 3 hours to give you your computer?
Yep, about 3 hours, and then I had to sign some paperwork. Yep.
Yeah, and it was like, welcome to DOT, Katie, go home and do great things. So she and I have spent hours, countless hours in Teams meetings and Skype calls and to figure out how to manage all this program. And so we did it, and here we are.
Yeah. To fill in one of the blanks is the Wisconsin Historical Society is a state agency. So our process is authorized by the DOA, and we were not authorized for digital signatures. So our entire process, Wisconsin kind of prides itself in efficiencies, finding efficiencies, streamlining things. We don't want to be a pointless bureaucracy. There's nothing in our process that's just a hoop. It's not for fun. Everything has a purpose. And so we had this system finely tuned, but it had to be hard copy. And so, I would have to explain to people on the phone, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but hard copy makes everything run so much more smoothly. And then we could guarantee our 30 days. We could not guarantee it if something is sitting in someone's email inbox, that suddenly gains 2 pages during a meeting, and then your email's gone. So requiring WisDOT, which has thousands of pieces of paper to any particular project, to give things to us hard copy, we recognized as a hardship a long time ago, and had been working on that. But things were hard copy until the day we went home. And that was just kind of how the system was built. But we did have a companion database once things made it into the building that helped with tracking. So we did have a bit of a database already there pre-COVID that we were using internally. And then we'll talk about what happened later on the next question.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say, one, going back to Lynn, while Wisconsin has many projects that flow through it, we actually have a much smaller cultural resources team than a lot of states our size and amount of projects that we put forward. So yes, there are only 2 of us, which is why we do contract out help with a professional services contract, which Mead and Hunt has held for the last almost over 20 years, I think now. So we do have outside help, but there really are only 2 team members. So if one leaves, we're down to 1, and it can be very difficult during non-pandemic times. Add a pandemic to that, and it is Lynn is. We're lucky she's here still. And yes, that's the other thing I just wanted to jump in on, is that I was the person who got all of the hard copy compliance files when I was at SHPO, and so we had a very robust system for that, but it was all paper. So every single 106 that came into the office had to be paper copy, and someone had to go through all of it, log it into their database, the Wisconsin Historic Preservation Database, or WIPT. That might come up a couple of times as we keep talking. And then it was handed out to the reviewers. But as the pandemic started and things were shutting down, we were getting several emails from some of our larger submitters what they were going to do now that they didn't have people in the office. So I will pass it over to our consultants to kind of give an idea of what their job was before COVID.
Before COVID, I guess from the consulting side, a lot of things didn't change. We're essential services, so pre and post COVID, we were going out and we were doing field surveys. We were doing the reports. A lot of what we do is driven by project schedules, and so there isn't a lot of opportunity for delay or putting things off. It was a lot easier to find staff who were willing to go places and travel. I have a team of people who will arm wrestle each other for certain projects because they really want to be out and seeing new resources and seeing different parts of the state or the country. So we did a lot of research, we did a lot of field work, and then we would do a lot of report production in the office. For WisDOT projects, we do a lot of projects for the Minnesota DOT as well. Everything used to be hard copy. So it would be hard copy maps, photographs, reports, In a lot of cases, we had 1,000-page submittals that we would have to ship off to our clients and the review agencies. But we also worked in other states where we did work directly for the DOT, and we would send them everything as a PDF, and then they would submit it on their end to the SHPO office. So that was kind of the consulting side pre-COVID.
Kristen, could you give a feel for how MnDOT was doing stuff pre-COVID?
Yeah, so at MnDOT, we had worked for a number of years to develop an internal tracking system. So we had something called CRIS, the Cultural Resource Information System, where we required everything be submitted to us electronically. There was always the random paper submittal that we got, but that's how we were notified of projects, and then we would track it in our internal tracking system. We were required to submit everything to the Minnesota SHPO with paper copies. So we, once COVID hit, SHPO, had to, I guess, in a very similar way, figure out how they were going to do this process. They did set up a single submittal email box so that, the problem you were talking about, if something sat in one person's folder, it would get lost this way. There was one folder that everything got submitted to, so multiple SHPO staff could access it. So that was, really helpful. During the early days of COVID, our SHPO was fine with submitting things electronically, but they did want paper copies. So eventually we got to the point where we would have somebody go in like once a month or something and print out in the office the hard copy of what we'd already submitted electronically, and then, deliver it to their office. I would say that went, pretty smoothly. I don't know what their future plans are, and I'm curious, Kimberly, for Wisconsin, and I'm sorry, maybe if I'm jumping ahead with the questions, but do you think that this has forced a change that maybe is a good one and you're going to keep going? Because I'm not quite sure what our SHPO's plans are in that regards. I will say one more thing, is that we also and Mead and Hunt helped MnDOT do this. We would get the SHPO database and convert it into a GIS file so that the staff at MnDOT had easily accessible information about where the known historic properties are. We don't have any sort of online public system for standing structures. So that was another thing we were doing just internally to make sure we could see what resources were in the area, because we couldn't go into the SHPO office for a while. Did I jump ahead to a future question? Sorry.
Waiting for the go-ahead to bring us to the present.
Well, I do want to give Bethany an opportunity to talk about her job before the pandemic also, since she does a lot of she's our FHWA liaison, so she does a lot of liaisoning with us during this time and previously.
I think I probably had it the easiest of all of you, because we have a programmatic agreement that delegates a lot of the federal highway responsibilities for Section 106 down to WSDOT. So I really only get involved in cultural resource issues once there's an adverse effect, or if there's a suspicion of an adverse effect. That's when federal highway gets involved and gets to be more of a part of the consultation process, and that's when we'll get the draft documentation. I had already switched, my coworker and I, to getting information in electronic format. I do remember, because I've been here 10 years now, used to get things in paper, but once it moved to electronic, I think I would still have to print off and sign my name to something and then scan it back in. But my regular day-to-day job of 106 didn't change too much, other than calling Lynn or emailing her and reassuring that she was okay and Federal Highway would help her out if needed, if we needed to be involved in some more activities. She had it. She had support from Federal Highway, Mead and Hunt, and SHPO, and it worked really well. I mean, I still reviewed MOAs, provided comments, sent information to the advisory council asking if they'd want to participate, but things weren't too different for me. I mean, I did get to go out on site at times and the in-person meetings before COVID, and I really enjoyed that. So, but my job, unfortunately, or fortunately, was pretty limited in the 106 cultural resources processing.
Yes, I missed the in-person meeting, so hopefully we can go back to those sooner. As it's nice to kind of see everybody in person. But moving on to the next question, which is, how did COVID change your job, and kind of what were the changes to the procedures in your day-to-day job that you had to make during this time?
I will start again and apologize for kind of answering both questions in one. But it's so hard I'll be honest, it's really hard for me to even think back pre-COVID to all that paper we were processing. I don't know how we ever got anything done because we were dependent on the mail and then getting it to the next place in paper form. And Bethany made me think of something. As we were literally, as I was being told to leave the office, I was trying to get written signatures still on 106s to go to SHPO, and our bureau director, who's our historic preservation officer, had already been sent home. And so I remember calling him saying, "Can someone else to sign these, please?" And he did give permission to my direct supervisor to do that. So we went from all of that, straight into this electronic submittal process that utilized DocuSign and Box. We quickly learned, that files were too large to be sharing on email directly, and again, DOT was a little bit ahead of the curve, thankfully, that we had already started utilizing Box. So when we started having conversations with SHPO, we quickly went, okay, I can set up a Box site. We can share our files through Box. So it really, honestly, once we got over that initial shock of, okay, we're doing this, the electronic submittal process was natural and easy. So really the change in my job, although I think the biggest change is everything electronic takes more time for me personally. Paper was easy to move from person to person. Utilizing electronic files and Box, it can be a little bit clunky. So I do feel as though I have had to slow down and take the time to do the things that we need to do. I'll be very curious, Kim, to hear if your reviews are easier electronically now that we are into this, more than a year, and how you prefer, or if you preferred that paper. Like for me personally, I liked to touch the paper. Again, can't imagine going back there, but I would say the biggest change is accepting that things do take a little bit more time for review because you are paging through PDF on your satellite internet at home for me personally, so sometimes it's not super fast.
Yeah, this is the part I'm most excited to talk about. We have had this tracking database, the WIPT, honestly since the late 90s, and then it was rebuilt in about 2000 as an internal database for tracking. So it had a particular capability. Starting in 2017, we started mapping out our process with our IT to figure out, because we knew we didn't want to use email. We wanted to be able to use the system that had already been built. And we do have a pretty good IT program, plus the SHPO has a programming contractor that we have also hired. And so starting in 2017, we started looking at process and how, for IT, how does that translate into some sort of system? We also did a lot of kind of customer surveys. We knew from conversations about what's frustrating, what's not, and what people need. So 2018 and 19, our computer person started building a dashboard, and that was all behind the scenes. Most of us hadn't even seen it. We started to see it at the end of 2019. And what it was a way for clients to be able to submit PDFs. That was the first part, was getting the WIPT to accept a PDF. And once they did that, that was a game changer for all of our databases. The WIPT is a database suite. Compliance is just one part of it. We also have the archaeology database, the historic properties database, tax credit, and national register. So all of those are in this database suite, and allowing the program to accept PDFs was huge. And I had always accepted JPEGs. Then the dashboard will allow clients to be able to log in, submit their own materials, and then see status. That was a really important part to us, because I used to be the general phone line, and I was constantly fielding phone calls of, where are we in the process? I sent it 2 days ago. Where are we in the process? So being able to remove some of that kind of anxiety where they could just look it up themselves and get me off the phone so that I could actually do the reviews. I can review this a lot faster than I can explaining to you where I'm at. So once we got to the pandemic, we were almost probably about 6 months away from actually testing that by itself. On a natural timeline, we were pretty close to announcing. I think I had added to my emails to nervous people, like, digital compliance is coming. Like, it's coming. I'm not involved in the process, so I can't tell you when, but it's coming. So when COVID hit, then it was a matter of flipping the switch. What we have is good enough. It could accept the PDFs, and then it was a matter of, with WisDOT being one of our largest agencies, at least the one that sends us the most consistent packets, the pieces are always pretty consistent. So I'm always offering up WisDOT as test subjects. And also, because we have such an excellent working relationship, it's just like, well, we got WisDOT, like, let's get them in there. And being able to then, with them and a couple of other agencies in the state of Wisconsin, DNR, and a few others, talk about Box and DocuSign and kind of these other tools, because WIPT wasn't completely finished. Our IT guy spent the rest of probably March, April, and May building the system and the dashboard to be able to turn that dashboard on kind of mid-pandemic. And then we started training people and accepting digital submissions through the system pretty late in the year last year. But to the external user, what we were hoping is nothing looked any different, just that they could submit it digitally. It started with an email, and then training, being able to send it into the system. We discovered after the first month that our review times went from 14 days to 7 days turnaround from receiving, logged in, to reviewed. Part of that is because we're at home and not bothering each other, being pulled into other emails or into other meetings and things. And we actually had the ability to sit down and review large projects without interruption. The other thing was this dashboard, being able to see all of our projects instead of the falling down piles sitting behind me of all these hard copies. I was able to digitally see, here's my projects, knock a couple out. I've got 45 minutes at the end of the day. You asked, Lynn, if I preferred the old way to the new way. And the thing is, I'm completely torn. One of my favorite things to do is to curl up in my office with a coffee and pull out those large plans and just, take a look at everything. You guys know that I begged for hard copy photos, which was so annoying to you guys, and I know that. But having the report and the photos and being able to flip through things, I'm an archaeologist by training, which means I relied on my architecture historian colleagues. I would see something that kind of tweaked my spidey sense, and I would take that photo into someone's office and say, you know, do we need more information here? Not having that is a bummer for my brain. But once I saw that digital list of my projects and watched it get smaller and smaller as I was sending emails through the system, that's another thing that changed, is the capability of sending an email through the system meant I could respond with a templated email in seconds. And then once DOA asked us to sign off on a project digitally, and we said, hey, can we do that? DOA said, oh, sure, yes, sorry. The next day we were on DocuSign, and WisDot, I think we tested a couple of them, and then I had 14 in my inbox, and we were just like off and running, and that's been kind of amazing too. So I guess we don't have to go back. I guess we're fine here. We're excited for what comes next, which is more kind of GIS capabilities and kind of tweaking that dashboard, making it a little better. We're still training agencies. Some of the smaller agencies will be bringing in for digital Section 106, just because it's working and we never stopped. There was no delay in our reviews, and from what we've heard from other people, they've been very grateful. Consultants and other agencies have been grateful for what we're able to accomplish, but it was all because of pre-planning.
You know, can I jump in real quick, Katie? I want to mention that the system that Kim's talking about, I, again, as not a technical expert, had not been using that whipped system you keep hearing us talk about much. I can dabble in it and get in trouble, but I am not great at it. And so, you know, when we did switch from using Box to submit to the system, thankfully I had Katie, who was there and a part of it and was familiar with it. But we had one Teams meeting where she taught me, and it is literally so easy to use that even I now can go in without Katie's support and submit those projects. So I want to give kudos to SHPO for coming up with a system that really is super user friendly and very easy for all of us, you know, which helped make all of this so much better.
Yeah, the one thing that I think Wisconsin had going for it to make kind of the transition to a virtual digital submittal is that we did have the Wisconsin Historic Preservation Database, and the staff was already thinking about how digital submittals would work in the future. I will say that there was kind of that before we left and we weren't able to flip the switch, we came up with a system of submitting to the one email, our compliance email address, and then the person who took over my role, it goes through those daily and kind of sends out an email letting people know what they've been given. But even that seemed to work fairly well. I know Leslie Eisenberg, another compliance reviewer, the first one I did and I sent to her, she was like, this is amazing. Why weren't we doing this earlier? And I was like, if Leslie likes it, it's probably gonna work. So, consultants, how did life change? I know lots of things closed down. We had lots of discussions as to how do you do good surveys and evaluations when you can't get into a library.
Yeah, that it has been interesting. You know, a lot of repositories have been closed or still closed. Some others are open. We have been able to have librarians or archivists assist with a lot of research if the facility is open, which has been great. It has maybe hindered things just a little bit. It hasn't stopped any projects from happening. We actually just did a determination of eligibility for the Mayo Clinic as a historic district without actually being able to go to the Minnesota Historical Society to do research and really relying on the County Historical Society to pull things and help direct that research. I think for us, you know, we did a lot of things organically. When we were in the office together, you would go out and you would do a survey and you'd kind of bounce ideas off of each other about, could this be eligible? Have you seen something like this in the past? And a lot of that happened more in passing, or you'd pop over to somebody's cube. And now I think one of the biggest changes is everything has to be so deliberate, and you almost have to schedule time to talk about things with people that before it just happened naturally. So on the consulting side, I think that's one of our biggest things, is just more scheduled and directed conversations. But our team did a great job with kind of rolling with everything. Our IT department, sometimes we grumble about IT and they just don't understand historians. But, on day one, we all went home and we were working on the network seamlessly. There were no problems. We had all the equipment that we needed. But we did have to get a lot more creative with our research, how we were going to plan and schedule field work, who would be available to go and do survey. And I might be jumping ahead on some of your questions, Katie. But I think for that was some of the biggest things that changed for us. And then because we work across so many states, also navigating all of the different states and how they were handling submittals has been kind of interesting. And I would say working in Wisconsin, it's been the easiest transition. We were already putting everything together as a PDF for our internal electronic library. So we already had that. We could send it on for review. Other states are a little different. We have some states we're working in where 60-day turnarounds on review is considered quick. So Kim, what you guys are doing with, sometimes 1 week to 2 weeks instead of 30 days is impressive. You are above and beyond a lot of other states right now.
Yeah, Kristen, I'm curious how COVID changed when you worked at MnDOT. I know you talked a little bit about that with the last question, but
yeah, I do just want to say, first of all, I am so impressed by what I'm hearing about what's going on in Wisconsin. You have 2 DOT staff, and the 14 or 7-day turnaround is just remarkable. So kudos to you all. And I think, the fact that you started planning many, many years ago for how to address, databases and workflow and all that kind of stuff is excellent, and that's probably why you were able to do some of that so quickly. I think we're in Minnesota we've had internal tracking systems at the DOT. The SHPO, I think, is trying to create a system similar to what you have, but they don't have that in place yet as far as the database.
That is because the Minnesota SHPO person used to work for us, so she's trying to recreate the WIP for them.
Right. Yeah. So I know they're working on that, but it isn't here yet. So I think that's been causing some of the problems. They're reliant, and DOT and SHPO have been working for many years on getting all the historic property inventory online with reports and everything. But right now, SHPO has to go into the office to pull files because it's all paper-based. So yeah, it's been very much the opposite. We 60 days has become the norm for responses. So we were seeing, a lot of project impacts because of, the timelines and all that. So that has been one of the biggest challenges. I'm not, with the DOT anymore, so I don't know how that's changed more recently. But that was probably the biggest change, was just trying to incorporate that into our timeline so there still weren't project delays.
Okay, well, we're actually running short on a little bit of time, so I'm going to skip a couple of questions and actually go back to Mead and Hunt and ask them kind of how did COVID change the way that you handled surveys, both in Wisconsin and then out of state, since there were travel restrictions and social distancing and all of that.
It has been an interesting year for doing survey work. And I think over the past year, we've had 2 different kinds of projects. We've had the larger, more programmatic statewide projects, and then we've had the smaller project-specific surveys that we've had to do. So for the larger projects, we've had a lot more flexibility with schedules. Some things we've been able to push off and are now starting to schedule as people are becoming more comfortable going out and doing field work. But we have done some statewide bridge surveys over the past year. And for those projects, we've had to send staff on their own. And interestingly, pre-COVID, a lot of people didn't want to do survey work on their own. They were less comfortable with that for safety issues, but during COVID, people were more comfortable doing individual survey. So we did have staff that were comfortable with travel. And we sent them out to do field work. We had to be careful to monitor state guidelines and make sure that we were in compliance with all the travel best practices. For the smaller project-specific surveys that we had to do, as I mentioned, we're essential services. So we had to continue to go out and to do this work, and we had to be mindful of project schedules. And as Kristen mentioned, we do some work in Minnesota, and they're allowing for a 60-day review period. We had to build that into a lot of project schedules, which made things more difficult, especially if they were reviewing more than one component of a project. Sometimes that would, triple the review time needed, and we had to get creative with how we handled that. But for the most part within Wisconsin and in some of the other states we work where we have staff, it was easy to do day trips. So most staff were comfortable with doing a driving trip, but we did use 2 vehicles in most cases, which added some project costs. I did some survey work with newer staff, and I would say that it was really hard to do training or mentoring when you're each in your own vehicle. In rural areas, we could stop, get out, talk about properties together, and kind of read a building and talk about what we're seeing. But it did complicate things when you're in an urban area with traffic and congestion. Trying to have conversations and hear each other when you have a distance between yourself was hard. We did a 2-mile corridor survey in an urban area on the coldest day of the year. And that was hard because neither one of us really wanted to trudge up and down, snowy sidewalks. And we could be in a car, but we had to be in front seat and back seat and masks. And it made it really hard to communicate and to really take the time to train staff. So I think those were the biggest things. We still pulled everything off. We didn't have any problems meeting project schedules or getting anything done. But it made everything a little more difficult. We had to get pretty creative in some cases, and we had some staff that maybe missed out on some opportunities just because they weren't comfortable with the travel, or they were in a location that didn't allow for ease of access to fieldwork opportunities.
Mm-hmm. So Bethany, I'm going to ask you, as FHWA and across the country, how do you think WisDoc compared to how other states kind of went through their 106 process during COVID?
I suspect that there's a lot of similarities between what Wisconsin was doing and a lot of other states. I know that there are states that were all electronic beforehand, and a lot of their whole processing of documents and all their reviews were through a large system. But I suspect that there were a lot of states besides Wisconsin and Minnesota that had a lot of paper that was used. And I think that's probably encouraged a lot more to find some workarounds in how to use email, or even just setting up email inboxes to submit things to. That was something even we were starting to do within our office for environmental reviews to come in. I haven't heard a lot nationally about difficulties in it. I think that honestly, the state DOTs and the consultants probably had more flexibility in how they were administering their programs and still being able to do some things in person, whereas the feds, at least Federal Highway, honestly, I haven't been back to my office since March 13th, 2020. I haven't gone back in yet. There's some of my coworkers that have and some haven't. We're just starting to get authorization to travel. My supervisors can't currently meet anybody from WSDOT in person. So it's been a little bit slower. So very grateful that business hasn't completely stopped, that we've all been able to find a way to keep moving forward and using the criteria that were in place for us to help protect our health to keep projects moving forward.
Okay, last question. What are you looking forward to once COVID restrictions are over? And how do you think your processes will change and or stay the same?
I'm looking forward to like being with people again. I definitely miss the people and that interaction. I'm hopeful that, you know, the processes are working, and I hope we just continue forward. Wisconsin Department of Transportation has made a decision as an agency whole that as long as it works for your unit area, that you can work from home 60% of the time. For us, we were not engineers, so we had to ask that question, what is exactly 60% of the time? We were told it's 3 days a week if you so choose. So although Katie and I are making a conscious decision that we collaborate so much, we'd rather do it in person than over Teams meetings and Skype. So we probably will spend more of our time in the office. But I really see not much probably changing outside of learning, you know, how are we going to do this meeting thing with half the people at home and half in work. So, but I think you've heard here that the relationship that we've had with SHPO over the years, with federal highways, you know, with Mead and Hunt, you know, really it was a seamless effort, and we've just kept things moving. So, but yes, people, I'm so glad to be back to people soon.
I will jump in and say that I am looking forward to at least having discussions of we are re-talking about our programmatic agreement between FHWA, SHPO, and WSDOT. And I'm looking forward to doing some of those meetings in person. I think hopefully will help us kind of move forward, especially on some of the stickier issues we're going to have to talk about in the future. Anyone else?
I would echo what you both said. I mean, I think that, and what Emily mentioned earlier, that just organic collaboration that happens when you're face to face, that's the best way for everybody to learn and share. So I'm looking forward to that. And I don't know what the future will be for the review process here in Minnesota. I know that there is an effort to try and keep moving towards digital. So I hope that this, you know, does sort of keep that momentum going forward, and that eventually becomes more of a streamlining tool. But we'll see how that develops.
I look forward again as being in person, being able to touch paper again, but I know I need less paper than I used to. I definitely would gain a lot from in-person consultation. You can pick up a lot more on the body language and be able to jump in, I think, better. We're asking questions, driving through a site. I hardly remember what some areas of Wisconsin look like. Just last weekend, my family and we went out to a little historic recreated village in one of the next towns over, and that was the first time we've done something like that as a family in over a year. And just being able to share history more directly and learn from it is exciting, to be able to do that in person again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the in-person meetings and just, you know, being able to interact with people in the office and share things with people, you know, more organic conversations. And just on the project management side, it's just going to be so much easier to schedule projects and know, you know, what to expect. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I bet field work will get a lot better.
Yes. Maybe I'll do some field work.
Maybe
But-
you can invite me to do some field work too. I do some
should do
site
that,
visits would be
Bethany.
great.
Yeah. Kim, I do have a question for you, which is, do you think all digital submittals will continue once you guys start coming back into the office, or are you going to start taking hard copies again for those? Because you haven't started the process for state projects or requests to disturb burial sites. Do you think all of that will stay digital, or do you think you'll start asking people to submit stuff hard copy?
It was our policy several administrators ago to never look back. Learn the lessons, but don't go back. So no, we don't have the mechanisms in place anymore for those filing cabinets, the filing cabinets with all the folders in it. In fact, a lot of those are already gone. So we've, and for the other forms of compliance, the requests to disturb, which Wisconsin has an extremely robust burial law, and the state and local projects, that's already been built as well. And so training started for requests to disturb for kind of the bigger players about a week or two ago. So it's full steam ahead. We are fully digital because we've been thinking about this since 2017. Flipping that switch was really kind of validating for all of our efforts and for the partnerships that we created. Hearing that it's user friendly means we ask the right questions early on, and anything that we need to tweak have the capability of doing. And I think one of our biggest strengths for the team that we have right now in the SHPO is that none of us are married to the old system. That we don't want to preserve a system just because that's the way it's always been. And hard copy is because that's the way it's had been. The only thing that the SHPO still requires hard copy is one hard copy of an archaeological report. And that's because of our archives. The fact that we have this larger state system in place that has a records retention policy that needs to be changed first. So that is kind of outside of our purview at the moment. So the GovDocs people and some of our archivists will be working on that once folks get our archivists and our librarians have all been reassigned this whole time. So they had been working for Department of Human Services, doing contact tracing, and our GIS person was tasked to the Department of the Army to help with vaccine rollout. So we are just now kind of bringing people back to resurrect some of those conversations. Compliance, we are so happy with the way that things have been working that's it. Now it's just what can we add? What can we make better? Our Felipe, our GIS person, has this grand idea about being able to capture project areas in GIS just by drawing lines. And that's kind of the thing that he's been kind of, contemplating for a long time. And that'll probably be the next part that gets added in. And I'm sure at some point the other sections are going to say, hey, what about us? But right now compliance has a lock on our IT programmer.
Those are all the questions I have. I want to thank everybody for stopping by today and having this really nice chat. Does anybody else have anything else they want to add before we sign off? No, we're all good.
This is great. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. I'm gonna turn it off. Sorry, it's not letting me stop the recording. There we go. Turn it off.
Great. Looks like we already have a discussion going on in the chat. So I believe we can start with that.
Let's see, Melissa had a couple questions and she just wanted to make sure that they got verbalized. She says there's a little bit of background noise where she is. So I think she was curious about digital databases and how that's going to go forward. But I think a little bit of that was answered. at the end, she was asking if there were any drawbacks to a mostly digital process for the long run, especially with accessing protected data like archaeological site locations. So if there's any more insight into that you can answer, that would be good.
Yeah, I definitely can. Hi, everyone. Nice to talk face to face, kind of. Yeah, so the Wisconsin Historic Preservation Database is only available by subscription. So in order to access it, you either have to come into the office, into the SHPO office, and talk with someone, and they kind of talk you through how to use the system, and then kind of ask what you need the system for, or WisDOT and other consulting firms have subscription to it. So you have to sign several pieces of paper before you are able to access that. And one of those is about keeping those archaeological sites safe from the public. So not everybody can get that information, and it is hidden behind a bit of a paywall. So that is the archaeological side. The digital process, at the moment, the only downsides I'm seeing at the moment are a little bit more work for us. Our paper process and our paper forms are very specifically designed to be read as a piece of paper. So what's probably going to come next is a redesign of our forms and a redesign of our survey manual, which is work that's going to fall to me and the one other person in the office with me. So that is the only downside I'm seeing. I will say that when I was at SHPO at the beginning of the pandemic, we received multiple emails kind of emailing us directly and saying, are you going to take digital submittal? Other states are telling us they're not. We aren't sending people to the office. If you don't take digital submittal, we won't be able to send you things. And so we have had, when I was at SHPO, we had no federal agency who pushed back on digital submittal. In fact, many people asked for it. At the beginning of the pandemic, in that first March, April, what the process is that you would get an email sign off from one of the 106 reviewers at the Wisconsin SHPO, and then in that email it would specifically say if you need a hard copy signature of this page, please let us know and we will get one in the mail for you. People were still going into the office to check mail so that it didn't pile up, and every person that we emailed said, no, this is fine, please don't send us any more hard copy paper. So at the moment it seems like everyone's pretty happy with it. And I know when we were talking to people in our office and letting them know that we weren't sure if Wisconsin SHPO was going to go back to paper or not, a lot of people in my office was uninterested in that and was like, can we push back on that? We send them a lot. Tell them we're not sending them paper anymore. So, so that's kind of the answer to that question. And I do think that there was a question actually at the beginning.
Yeah, I think they're talking about consultation,
yes.
How it affected consultation. And I don't know if you want to say more to that. I think there was a little bit of discussion in the presentation as well, but.
Yeah, I'd love to. So a consultation both, I think, worked better in the pandemic in some places and worked obviously worse in other places. I think our Native American consultation, which was already fairly robust, it got even better in the pandemic, weirdly enough. All of our TIPOs were very married to hard copy notification, which we were happy to do, but weren't able to do during the pandemic. And we've been hearing from them that email is actually working a lot better for them. It's a lot easier for them to wade through that and kind of find the projects that they're wanting and to easily email someone back and say, well, tell me more about this project. Where is it? What is it going to be doing? However, I think on the 106 side, the architecture history side, it's definitely suffered a bit. People aren't able to meet in person. We did set up a protocol for YouTube consultation meetings. But part of it is that due to how Wisconsin's kind of currently funding their transportation projects, there's very few projects going to adverse effect at the moment. It's mostly bridge removals, and that's about it. So for adverse effect consultation, we've been telling people to try and push off their meetings until this summer to see if they can get a better consultation effort. Other times it was just calling people on the phone, and people don't like to answer the phone, particularly from numbers that they don't know. So I do feel like our determinations of eligibility and consultation on smaller projects that didn't necessarily go to adverse effect, but we did some sort of effect documentation, did suffer. And so I'm hoping that that is better. Our SHPO was very forgiving since they knew people were having those issues, but we're hoping it can get back to where it was pre-pandemic, starting this summer.
Great. Were there any additional questions, Zoe, in the chat that we should address that came up during the presentation?
No, I think Matthew has his hand raised though, so we can go to that
so
one.
We'll move on then. Thank you.
Hey, Kate, does my hand not go down automatically?
No, it doesn't.
There we go.
No.
Okay. So, no, I just wanted to thank you for that presentation. I do 106 work in Georgia, and I identified very much with a lot of that. It absolutely tracked our experience down here. But the thing that stuck with me as I was watching that entire presentation, it wasn't even necessarily the items you all were discussing, but it was the relationships each of you clearly share. Because, you know, as historians in 106, we often get, we often talk about our successes or, you know, our less successful experiences based on, you know, the impacts to resources or, you know, what happens to the history, but really like 106 is a consultation process. So when you have those relationships built on such a level of mutual respect that I could have sworn you were all always in the same office, you know, like that's a very successful program. And that really struck me.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. Previously, the few architectural historians before me, they didn't have a good relationship. In fact, they only corresponded by memos, and that's it. And so my predecessor, the archaeologist that Lynn talked about, made a very conscious effort to come in and become less confrontational, and also the SHPO reviewer left also. So Kim came in, Jason, the archaeologist, came in, and I was just really lucky. I actually interned at the Wisconsin Historic SHPO when I was an undergrad. So I knew Kim when I was 21, putting away survey cards. And we had already had a really good relationship. And so it's really important for us. We saw how contentious it was previously, and when you're all fair on the same page or you're all willing to work with each other, it makes everything so much easier. And I love working with all of the people in that. As Emily said, Emily was my previous boss too, so it really helps. And it really helps when you're working on your delegation PA, which I know Georgia just did. So
yeah, right.
Great. Thank you. All right. I think I see Barbara has her hand up.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I just wanted to make a comment that I really liked this whole presentation, Katie. It was an amazing teaching tool. And it was also fun to see the interaction, as Matthew was saying, between the various people, and truly, you know, I mean, to see how a 106 review process can be handled within a state and who all the players are. It was really an informative, and I really liked just the whole nature of the discussion. So kudos to you guys, and thank you to your fellow participants, because I think it could be an amazing teaching tool for the program, just because of the way it shows how people actually deal with these issues in the field. Thank you.
Thank you. I really love working with these people. I will give a plug. The Wisconsin SHPO may be hiring in the future very shortly. WisDOT will be hiring a NEPA reviewer who will work with us part-time, and that's going up on Monday. And Mead and Hunt is actually looking for 2 new staff members, one in their Minneapolis office and one in their Madison office. And the person who they'd hire for that Madison office would actually work with me due to that contract we have. So just a plug, if anyone's interested in any of those opportunities, I'm really happy to tell you more. Come to the Midwest. It's great, except when it's 85 and June 12th. But thank you. I will pass that on to the people who I work with. I know when I approached Kim to be part of this panel, she was like, well, what are we going to talk about? It went really smoothly. And I'm like, well, that's what we're going to talk about, because I know like Minnesota is 60 days out on their reviews and some of them aren't getting done. So it's been really great to work with all of them. And I'm glad that that comes through. Oh, and Michael, if you need anyone to come and talk about Section 106, I'm a weirdo and I love talking about Section 106. I'm the only person in the world who just loves talking about it.
You're on.
No, there's one other. There's a few of us nerds out here.
I remember telling Michael in grad school that I just wanted to do 106, and he gave me a very strange look, and I was like, just gonna do it. It's gonna be great.
Great. Is there anyone else that had a comment or question before we move forward?
Oh, you know what? I actually see that there is one more from Melissa, and I guess it's a comment and a question, but she is kind of asking about access to computers and wondering about those community groups that didn't have that. And we did do phone calls, and there were different ways. One, to access the YouTube consultation, if and when that was going on. The project had to be a certain size to make it to the YouTube public meeting. But we still sent out regular consultation letters and worked with kind of neighborhood groups to get information out there. So our regular consultation process, aside from doing it in person, stayed the same. We just added a digital component on, and we were very conscious about making sure that people who didn't have kind of regular access to computers still had a way to be part of the consultation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Katie. That was a really interesting dialogue, and I'm sure we all had a lot to take away from it. And many parts of it were relatable, especially, I don't work at the state level, but working at the local level, there were a lot of similarities during COVID. That's what you all experienced. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.